Hi everyone. I warmly welcome all of you to the second session of the topic Globalization and Worldwide Developments. So if you carefully look at your International Management subject course outline, you would see that this is the second topic of your syllabus. So this second topic is for 2 sessions. I have uploaded the full handout, but I have only uploaded the video lecture for part 1. So this is the video lecture for part 2 of this topic. So what am I going to discuss under this topic, under this session actually? So under this session, we will discuss the first thing, the evolution of globalization. You would remember that we are in the process of discussing about globalization. So first, we'll look at how globalization evolved and how it developed up to the level that it is now. And then we'll move on to discuss the components or facets of globalization. And then what factors are driving globalization? The drivers of globalization. And then we will move on to a topic which is also being largely discussed around us today, which is globalization, a threat or an opportunity. We all know that there is an everlasting debate as to whether globalization is a threat to the world or whether it has created a great opportunity to the world. So nowadays, where we are under a global pandemic, this topic or this debate is largely heard. So let's see or let's discuss further about this globalization debate. So here I have included two images of newspaper articles. These two newspaper articles have been taken from the internet. So these things talk about globalization in the midst of the global pandemic coronavirus disease. So if you are further interested about this globalization debate, you can read these articles. During these holidays, as I had been repeatedly mentioning, I am sure you don't have all the regular duties that you have been doing on other normal days. So in that case, you can make use of this valuable time in a valuable manner by reading these additional reading articles. So this article says the coronavirus is killing globalization as we know it. The outbreak has been a gift to nativist nationalists and protectionists, and it is likely to have a long-term impact on the free movement of people and goods. So as this title indicates, the coronavirus is disturbing or damaging the expected results of globalization. So then this current situation in the world has created a lot of positive support to nativist nationalists and protectionists. So who are nativist nationalists and protectionists? These are simply people who are against globalization. And also remember, people argue that though it is expected that coronavirus will kill globalization, it actually won't end globalization, but change it. And also the good news is that it would change it hugely for the better. So let's see. So as I mentioned before, I'm starting with the evolution of globalization. So these early days of globalization had been identified as Globalization 1.0. So this slide talks about the period in which globalization started. So approximately, if you take the calendar years, it could be from it started in around 1492. From 1492, the Globalization 1.0 or the Globalization version 1 existed up until early 1800s. So during this period, the globalization was at its first stage. So during that period, world shrunk. So we all know what happens with globalization. With globalization, world gets shrunk. The world becomes one global village. So world becomes shrunk. In Sinhala we call it Lokaya Hakilenawa. So world shrunk from large to medium. So during this first wave of globalization or the first stage of globalization, world shrunk only from the large scale to the medium level, not beyond that. So there was considerable amount of shrinking. So how did this globalization happen or take place? Through exploration, imperialism and colonialism, the focus was on countries and how they flattened the world. So this period, though some scholars identify that the Globalization 1.0 existed from 1492 up to early 1800s, some scholars say that it lasted up until 1945. That is the end of World War. However, so basically it was there from 1492. So during this period, the world was invaded by European colonialism. What do you mean by European colonialism? European colonialism is Europa Adhirajyavadaya. යුරෝපීය රටවල් විසින් ලෝකය පුරා තම අධිරාජ්‍ය බලය පිහිටුවීම. So you may have studied about this European colonialism for your for the subject history during your O-levels, where you may have studied about different invasions, including now Sri Lanka was also a victim of this colonialism. So then Portuguese, Dutch and British invaded countries like Sri Lanka and other developing nations or other resourceful nations. We can't call them developing nations at that time because our countries were highly developed during that period. But we were very resourceful during that period. So this colonialism invaded Asian countries like Sri Lanka and India. So most of these Commonwealth nations today had once been a British colony. So then, and also the identification of countries like USA, etc. So through exploration, imperialism and colonialism, the Western countries tried to invade and spread their power on other countries. So then all these countries became a part all these countries came under the British or colonial rule. So that is how the initial stages of globalization happened. And it to some degree flattened the world. So during this period, these countries actually came to Asia in search of labor and other natural resources. We all know that Middle East had oil and Asian countries had lot of natural resources. That's what I said. During those days, Sri Lanka was a very resourceful nation. And also we all know that in Asia, Asia is relatively more populated compared to the western part of the world. So we can find the people resource very easily in this part of the world. So therefore they came in search of the people resource or the labor. And also because there were a lot of people, they could find people for employment at cheap rates. So they came in search of cheap labor. And also the good thing for them was that these people were very skilled. So they were able to find skilled cheap labor in Asian countries. So that's about Globalization 1.0. So you are further requested to find the exact meanings of the concepts of exploration, imperialism and colonialism. Then the world moved to Globalization 2.0. So the Globalization 2.0 or the second version 2 of globalization took place from 1800 to year 2000. So during that period, the world, as I mentioned before, globalization refers to shrinking of the world. So then the world had already shrunk from large to medium during globalization version 1. So during version 2, world shrunk from medium to small. So the world became a very small global village. So world shrunk from medium to small. The world became still smaller. Focus was on multinational companies flattening the world through market and economic means. So in the previous slide, I explained that in Globalization 1.0, the focus was on imperialism, exploration and colonialism to flatten the world. But during this period, most of the countries were gradually gaining their independence and they were no longer countries under the British umbrella or any other colonization. So the focus during this period for the Western companies to take the control over other countries of the world was through multinational companies or MNCs or multinational corporations. They were corporations or companies, as I mentioned before, which started doing their businesses in the headquarters, that is in the western part of the world. And after doing business in their own countries, and after becoming successful business ventures, they started spreading their or expanding their business operations to other parts of the world, especially to Asia and Africa. Because there were no such large companies in these regions and therefore the products offered by these multinational corporations were largely embraced by the people in this part of the world, that is Asia and Africa. So that is how companies like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Kraft, Unilever, Nestle all came into this region. So then these companies contributed to flatten the world. How? by obtaining resources, raw materials and people resources from Asia and Africa to do the production and sell around the world, including Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, all that. So they flattened the world through market and economic means. So initially during Globalization 1.0, the flattening of the world came as a political task. Now it happened through market and economic means. So people from Sri Lanka as well as USA, UK, Europe all were using the same common products. And then this revolution or this transformation in the world was largely supported by the IT revolution. This IT revolution had just started. It had just started. It sharpened the tool for the real revolution. So the IT revolution or the revolution in information technology had just started during the 1800s and it gradually increased till 2000, and it showed that it can sharpen the tool for the real revolution which came after year 2000. So then, as there were a lot of changes that were taking place in the world from 1800 to 2000, some people divide Globalization 2.0 into two parts as the first half and the second half. What is the first half? That is global integration powered by falling transportation costs, steam engine and railroad. So the first half of Globalization 2.0, the global integration or the connection that took place around the countries of the world were mainly powered or supported by the transportation, whereas in the second half it was powered by the telecommunications industry. So during the first phase, there was a huge reduction of costs for transportation of both people and goods and goods. So therefore, this falling of the transportation cost was mainly due to the invention of the steam engine and the construction of railroads. And thereafter, gradually, it evolved to the developments in the airline industry. And then the second half or second part of Globalization 2.0, as I mentioned before, was powered by falling or reducing telecommunication costs. So that is how world became integrated or connected. So the world became integrated or connected as there were a lot of telephone facilities, computer facilities, satellites, fiber optic cables and other things. So nowadays we would see that every house around the world, not every house, almost all the houses have a land phone. In case if they do not have a land phone, at least they have a basic mobile phone. And if you take Sri Lanka, there are mobile phones more than the population in the country. And also a lot of people have smartphones where they can access internet through the phone. In addition, people have a computer or a tablet. So they can easily do a lot of work on the computer and then share it with people around the world through internet or email. And we have the satellite technology where we can watch the TV channels shown in other countries through things like Pure TV, Dialogue TV, etc. And then fiber optic cables were providing the internet connection those days. So we are still talking about globalization 2.0. And then now we are in globalization 3.0, the third version of globalization. This took place from year 2000 and it is still going on. Up to now, we identify it as Globalization 3.0. So now the world from large before globalization, the world was large. With globalization 1.0, the world became medium. And with globalization 2.0, the world became small. So we call it, this is a small world. But now with globalization 3.0, world is now tiny. The world is very small now, tiny. Everyone is everyone else's close neighbor. So nowadays, everybody is the other person's close neighbor. So if I want to speak to one of my friends in UK, I can immediately take a call, or I can take Viber, WhatsApp, telephone, messenger, email, whatever the call, and immediately talk or share resources through email. And or else if I want to send something to them, I can do that even through courier services. So now the world is very tiny. And now everybody around the world, all the business organizations and almost all the people are competing in a leveled playing field. Competitive playing field is being leveled. But this doesn't indicate that each and every person around the world has the same equal access to all the resources. It is not that. This means now everybody is competing in the same market. So the competition coming from multinationals affects the top of the road Kade as well, as I had been always telling. So during globalization 1.0 and even 2.0, the top of the road Kade was not largely affected by the supermarkets. The popularity of supermarkets happening around the world. But now it has been affected. So this concept of supermarkets where we self-serve our products started or evolved in other countries and got spreaded or popularized in Sri Lanka as well later on. So now the playing field is level, means everybody is competing in the same playing field. So the winners will be decided based on the amount of access to resources. Anyway, this concept of the leveling of the playing field is largely being debated by people who identify globalization as a threat, saying that it is a very negative effect of globalization. So during this period, the key agent of change is software. Not even the computer, the software. The apps on smartphones and the softwares that we use like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Facebook, Skype, Viber, WhatsApp, all these in conjunction with the World Wide Web. So the change in the world is mainly created by software and apps. And now it has enabled people to collaborate, work together, Now, a lecturer from a Sri Lankan university can do a research jointly with another lecturer in a university in Poland. So that is collaboration, and also compete globally. Sri Lankan tea is now competing with all the tea around the world, all the tea producing countries around the world. So now collaboration and competition both happens globally. So this picture shows how the world became smaller with globalization. From large to medium, medium to small, small to tiny. So with that, I conclude the first section of this lesson, that is about the evolution of globalization. And then I move on to the second section of this lesson. The second section of this lesson is about the two main components of globalization, or we call this the two main facets of globalization, or the two main parts of globalization. The globalization has happened in markets and production, two components. Globalization of markets, globalization of production. So this picture shows this is a clear example of globalization of production. So you would see this is a motor vehicle. In the early days, let's say if you take a German car, the car is completely manufactured in Germany. It is not the case now. Engine is manufactured in the UK. So the engine fixed to this car is manufactured or made in UK. And also the headlights are manufactured in the same country, that is UK. But this includes tires manufactured in France. And the alloy wheels are manufactured in Romania. Suspension system is manufactured in Sweden. The drive system is manufactured in Austria. Bodywork manufactured in India. The body of this vehicle is manufactured in India. Glass is manufactured in Germany. So all the glasses, the windscreens and the shutters are manufactured in Germany. Bumpers and some accessories are manufactured in Spain. So then all these parts are assembled together to make the vehicle. So hereafter we cannot call it a British car or a German car or an Indian car, because different parts of the product are manufactured in different countries of the world and at one location or one factory located somewhere. All these things are assembled together to manufacture the final product. So this is called the globalization of production. Then globalization of markets. We will discuss it next. So what do you mean by globalization of markets? So earlier we could identify that there were different national markets. Sri Lankan market, Indian market, like that. But we no longer find national markets. There are no separate national markets. The market in Sri Lanka has products from Sri Lanka, Japan, China, Australia, West, everything. You may clearly find it, as you would see that certain products in our market which we buy are made in China, made in Europe, made in Japan, like that. You may have observed this where even the national flag and the Vesak lanterns sold in Sri Lankan market were made in China. So that is globalization of markets. So which means the products manufactured in a particular country have the market to be sold around the world if you take the necessary action. So it in one hand is good because if a person is very interested in the business, he can produce goods and services and sell for markets around the world. Earlier, it was not like that. Earlier, different countries had different separate national markets. So the products produced in Japan were only sold in Japan because the products were produced in Japan were only for the Japanese national market. Now we can see the merging of these markets. The merging of historically distinct and separate national markets into a one huge global marketplace. The merging or combining of historically different and separate national or local markets into one huge large global marketplace. How has this happened? This has happened due to the falling trade barriers to cross-border trade have made it easier to sell internationally. So as I have inquired from you in the queries, you would see that companies are trying now to sell internationally. So companies can produce products in a particular country and sell internationally in foreign markets. How has this become possible? It has been made easier by the falling trade barriers to cross-border trade. So now we are selling internationally means we are engaging in cross-border trade. That is, we are engaging in trade activities across different countries. You call it cross-border trade. So, cross-border trade has only become possible due to the falling of trade barriers. What are trade barriers? Things like regulations preventing or stopping export-import trade and also taxes. If you take the current situation in the world, now there are trade barriers for cross-border trade. You may have seen that the Sri Lankan government has imposed a huge list of products which cannot be imported to Sri Lanka. So that is a trade barrier. So that's what I said earlier. This coronavirus pandemic has disturbed globalization because globalization happens with the falling of trade barriers. But now with this pandemic, we could again see that different countries are imposing trade and also travel barriers to cross borders. So this globalization of markets has been largely disturbed by this coronavirus pandemic during the present time. And tastes and preferences of consumers converge on to a global norm. Earlier, the tastes and preferences of consumers were limited only to their own country. Because whether I like to eat burgers or not, or whether I like to drink tasty coffee or not, I had to only have the products available in Sri Lanka. But now we have the option. So the taste and preferences or likings of consumers have converged or converted onto a global norm. That is, they can buy products from around the world. Products from around the world from international brands are now available for sale in Sri Lanka. For an example, consumer products such as Citigroup credit cards are now available for people in Asia. Coca-Cola soft drinks are now spread around the world. Sony PlayStation video games are played by kids around the world. There is no place that we cannot find a McDonald's. So whenever we go to another country, not to America, let's say to Indonesia, to Malaysia, whatever, we still look for McDonald's to eat hamburgers. And whatever the airport that we go, we drink Starbucks coffee. So now all these products are available around the world. And also, now there is this customization of products. I won't say it is zero. It is there, but it has got very limited. And now firms or companies are offering only standardized products. That is very common products for worldwide. And they manufacture the same standardized product for the market around the world. So because they are producing standardized products at one location, they can easily enjoy economies of scale. So as a result, they can sell the products at cheaper prices. And the other countries which incur huge costs to produce those products are importing from this country. But then again, you may have noticed the consequences of these during this kind of a global pandemic. And also, small firms too facilitate this and benefit from this. So now, small firms are also involved with this globalization of markets. So there are certain small firms, they produce only for the elite class, or they produce them for the premium market, and without selling in local markets like Africa and Asia, they directly sell their products to the US. They are not standardized products. They sell to the not only US but the western parts of the world and benefit from this. So there they can sell their products at a very high price and bring in foreign exchange to countries like Sri Lanka. So that's what I said earlier. Though we say that there is a standardization of markets that have taken place, but still we could see significant differences. Significant differences still exist among national markets along many dimensions. So still there are different consumer preferences. So there are significant differences still existing within the national market of one country along many dimensions of products, like consumer tastes and preferences. Some people prefer coffee, some people prefer tea. Some people prefer McDonald's burgers, whereas some people prefer Burger King's burgers. Then distribution channels. Some people prefer buying online, while some people do not prefer buying online. Then culturally embedded value systems. So some people always prefer to go to the shop or visit the market, select the products by themselves and buy it. Whereas some people prefer the ordering of products online and getting them delivered to the doorstep. So like that, there are differences in culturally embedded value systems, business systems, as well as legal regulations. So these differences frequently require companies to customize marketing strategies, product features, and operating practices to best match conditions in a particular country. So this situation has prevented companies from largely producing standardized products. Instead, these differences frequently or very often require companies or push companies to customize their product marketing strategies. So you would see the advertisements shown by Unilevers for their products like Lux or Lifebuoy in India and Sri Lanka is different from the advertisements that they use in the West. And the product features. You would see the differences in tastes in certain products, especially vehicles. If you take the Toyota cars sent to the Sri Lankan market and the Australian market, features have a huge difference. And also operating practices to best match conditions in a particular country. Companies may have to differentiate their operating practices to best match or best suit the conditions in a particular country. The best example that I can quote here is McDonald's arriving in India and not selling beef there because they were once rejected for selling beef in that country. But you know, in US and other parts of the world, their most popular product is the beef burger. So they have customized their product, the marketing strategy and the business practice to cater to the conditions in India. So next move on to the second facet of globalization or the second component of globalization. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two components of globalization. The first one was the globalization of markets, which I explained a little while ago. The second facet is the globalization of production. I have explained this briefly earlier as well. So what is globalization of production? Globalization of production refers to sourcing of goods and services from locations around the world to take advantage of national differences in the cost and quality of factors of production such as labor, energy, land, and capital. So globalization of the production process refers to sourcing or collecting or supplying of goods and services from locations or places or countries around the world. You would see, as I mentioned earlier, one product is produced by sourcing the required goods like wheels, body, headlights, glasses from different locations around the world. Why? To take the advantage of national differences in the cost and quality. So by doing this, companies take the advantage or the benefit of national differences. In one country, in UK, the headlights may be cheaper compared to Germany. So then getting the headlights from UK would be an advantage rather than manufacturing them in Germany in the cost and also quality of certain products, which are used as factors of production such as labor, energy, land and capital. So you would see that is why most companies start their manufacturing operations in Asia and Africa, and lot of things happen in Middle East to get energy, power, oil. By doing this, companies hope to lower their overall cost structure or improve the quality or functionality of their product offering. So why do companies try to take advantage of national differences in the cost and quality? By doing this, companies hope or expect to lower or reduce their overall cost of production. their overall cost structure of producing a particular good, or improve the quality or functionality or features of their product offering. The best example that is being discussed nowadays is the Boeing 787 and the 777 aircraft, which they say is made in the world, because different parts of this aircraft are manufactured in different parts of the world, and at the Boeing factory, what they do is simply assembling. It is also the same with IKEA furnitures. Early outsourcing efforts confined to manufacturing activities. So though we discuss about globalization of production, this globalization of production happens with regard to both goods as well as services. But actually, early outsourcing efforts were confined or limited to manufacturing activities. So manufacturing of products or goods or commodities. One example would be the Boeing aircraft. But now we could see outsourcing efforts with regard to services as well. Now, companies are taking advantage of modern communications technology, example, the internet, to outsource service activities to low-cost producers in other nations. So you could see nowadays companies are taking advantage or making use of the modern communication technology, the modern communication facilities. The satellite technology is social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also communication apps like Imo, Viber, WhatsApp, WeChat, all that. Through the internet to outsource service production activities also to low-cost producers in other countries, especially in India and China. The example is, nowadays we would see service activities like legal work and healthcare services are being outsourced to these low-cost producers. Certain law firms or certain companies in USA have their law firm is an Indian company based in India. So they use the communication technology to obtain the legal services from India for the legal matters of USA. The internet has allowed or given the opportunity for hospitals. So the healthcare industry have also now being outsourced some radiology work to India. So some of the readings of scan reports etc. are taking place in India for the patients in USA hospitals. Some radiology work to India, outsourcing of legal and accounting and tax services to India. And we all know that most of the call centers of most of the banks like HSBC are in countries like Sri Lanka and India. So now India is emerging as a major hub for outsourcing healthcare services. So with that, I conclude the second part of today's discussion, which is about the facets or components of globalization. The first part of today's lesson was about the evolution of globalization. And the second part was about components or facets of globalization. And the third part is about drivers of globalization. So let's discuss what are the drivers of globalization, or what factors have driven the globalization process, or what factors have supported the globalization process. The scholars identify two macro factors as drivers of globalization. So these two factors drive the globalization process. Decline in barriers to the free flow of goods, services and capital, and the second one is technological changes which create a global audience and global village. So the first one is decline or reduction in barriers to the free flow of goods, services and capital. The decline or reducing or the removal of barriers to the free flow of goods, services and capital investments in other countries. So now we would see through export-import trade and through franchises and through wholly owned subsidiaries in other countries, you produce products, you can buy products or sell products produced in one country in other parts of the world. And we discussed how services are shared through things like legal, accounting, call center and healthcare services, and also free flow of capital. Now you would see lot of companies like Chinese companies and Western companies making foreign direct investments in Asian and African countries. Many barriers to international trade are high tariffs on imports of manufactured goods to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. So then, what were these barriers? There were many barriers earlier for international trade. That is free flow of goods and services. Which were they? High tariffs or high level of taxes. On what? On imports of manufactured goods, imported products. Why? To protect the local industries from foreign competition. So if you consider Sri Lanka, until 1977, Sri Lanka had a closed economy where there were many barriers to international trade with high tariffs on imports of manufactured goods and also with legal barriers or bannings for import of goods. Even for a tax, they could not import certain goods. Why? To protect the domestic industries from foreign competition. Because certain importers of products would sell imported products at a lower price than the price sold by the domestic producers. Then people will buy the imported product and the domestic industries will collapse. So that is what happened for Sri Lanka after the liberalization of the economy in 1977. So at present, Sri Lanka is the most liberalized or most open economy in the South Asian region. And as a result, most of the domestic industries in Sri Lanka are facing huge foreign competition, and that led to the collapse of a huge amount of domestic industries. The second category which drives globalization is technological changes, use of communication technology and automation and robots. So technological changes create a global audience and a global village. Technological changes create a global audience for the global products and also creates a global village. So these technological changes are communication, information processing and transportation technologies. So with that, we conclude the third part of the today's lesson and move on to the fourth section, where we are going to be a part of the globalization debate. So what is the globalization debate? Whether globalization is a threat or an opportunity. So we are going to discuss whether the globalization is a threat to the world and whether it is a bad thing for the world and its people, or whether it is a great opportunity and it's a good thing for the people. So you can't give an yes or no answer for this. Globalization is a force for good. So first thing we have to understand is that globalization is a force created for the benefit of people in the world. So it is a force for good, which means it is a great opportunity for the whole world. Why? Why do I say so? It has the potential to generate wealth and improve living standards of people. Globalization is a force for good because it has the potential, it has the capacity to generate or create wealth, because our business is not limited to our country. Earlier, a Sri Lankan producer could only produce goods and services for the Sri Lankan market. So even if he had the capacity to produce and sell to the whole world, he could not do that. As a result, his cost of production was high. And as a result, he could not enjoy economies of scale. And as a result, he could not sell the products at a low cost. So the cost of living for the people was high. But now he can produce in Sri Lanka for several countries of the world, and if he has the potential and the capacity, he can sell it around the world and thereby produce at a lower cost, enjoy economies of scale and sell at a lower price. So then people will get the products at a lower price, saving their money, and also the producer can earn a lot of money. So in that manner, it generates wealth or income to the people. So then who says globalization is bad? Globalization is a force for good because it has the potential to generate wealth and also to improve living standards of people. So as a society, always what we try is to improve the living standards of the people. How can we do that? If we have access to quality goods and services, our living standards will be improved. So with globalization, we can utilize very high quality products produced in other countries if we have the wealth. So then it has improved the living standards of people. So then globalization is good. So do you all agree with me? But it isn't doing that well at the moment. So understand, look at the whole picture. Globalization is not doing that well as expected at the moment. So globalization is bad. Though it had the potential to generate wealth and improve the living standards, it isn't doing well at the moment. So as a result, the globalization has now become bad, and globalization has started to create a threat to the people in the world. The benefits from increased trade, investment, and technological innovation are not fairly distributed and globalization is increasing the gap between rich and poor. So then globalization is not good. It's bad. The benefits created through globalization from increased trade, investments and technological innovations are not equally or fairly distributed among everybody in the society. They are limited to a particular group of people. So as a result, the globalization is increasing the gap between the rich and the poor people in the society. The rich becomes more richer while poor becomes poorer. So in that case, globalization is bad. It's a threat to the world. So in the beginning, I said globalization is good. In the previous slide, in the beginning, I said globalization was good. And later on, I said globalization is bad. So which means there is a debate. So these are some examples to find out about globalization. In 1997 and in 1998, a financial crisis in Thailand spread to other East Asian nations and then to Russia and Brazil. Ultimately, it threatened to fall the economies of the developed world into a recession. So this is all because of globalization. In 1997 and 1998, a financial crisis occurred or started in Thailand. Because of globalization, it spread to other East Asian nations like Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, all that. And then it also spreaded to Russia and Brazil. Ultimately, it threatened to fall or collapse the economies of the developed world. For an example, United States into a recession. Another example, a financial crisis in America triggered or created a global economic recession in 2008 and 2009. And now we are in the best stage. In 2019 and 2020, when the COVID-19 virus started spreading in Wuhan, China, later it spreaded to Italy and other parts of Europe such as Spain and France, and then to UK and USA, currently killing approximately 65,000 people from USA only. So these are the negative consequences of globalization. So therefore, there is a negative impact of globalization. So at the exam, you may be asked what are the negative consequences of globalization. And then you should be able to answer while quoting this kind of examples. Critics. Who are critics? Critics are people who criticize things. So critics worry that globalization will cause job losses and environmental degradation. They worry or they argue that globalization will cause or create job losses in jobs. We have already seen this. As it has destroyed a lot of manufacturing jobs in advanced developed countries. We all know that as a lot of manufacturing companies have transferred their manufacturing operations to developing countries like in Asia and Africa. So in advanced developed countries, there are only a limited amount of manufacturing operations taking place. As a result, they are destroying manufacturing jobs. I think I have mentioned this in the previous lecture as well. While IBM laid off thousands of people in USA in the Silicon Valley, it created thousands of jobs in India recently. Because the cost of living in USA is high, they had to pay a high salary for US software engineers. Whereas they can get the same job done with equally qualified people at a lower price from India. And also this leads to environmental degradation as foreign companies enter different markets and they do not focus or they pay attention for the environment. As a result, now these anti-globalization protesters or critics, who are anti-globalization protesters? Protesters, you all know, no, you all have already gone for so many protests by now. So the anti-globalization protesters are the people who protest or express their disagreement towards globalization. So they are anti-globalization. They are against globalization. Now, regularly show up at most major meetings of global institutions like IMF, World Trade Organization, WHO, all that, say highlighting the negative consequences of globalization. So this is an image of a demonstration at the World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle in 1999, where the anti-globalization protesters began looting and rioting in the city's downtown area. So the threats created, this I think I mentioned previously also, even Americans are under threat with globalization. So everybody around the world is under threat with globalization. When we were young kids, growing up in America, this is stated by an American, we were told to eat our vegetables at dinner and not leave them. We also know this, no? When we were young or when we all are small, young kids growing up in America, we used not to eat. So then our parents told to eat all our vegetables at the dinner plate and not leave them. So mother said, finish the dinner. Think of the starving children in India and China. So they don't have enough food in India and China. And still you have got enough food in America. So why don't you eat them? Why do you waste them? And now I tell my children, finish your homework and do your studies really well. Why? If you don't study properly, if you don't do your homework properly, and if you don't get educated properly, there are children in India and China who have done their studies well, starving for your jobs. So most of the jobs in America are now taken by India and China. That I conclude the second session on globalization. So like in the previous lessons, if you have questions, you can email them to me so that I can answer them. And also you can discuss these questions during our next lecture, which will be a face-to-face session. So thank you very much for participation through online resources and for listening to this lecture. And I again repeat, you are kindly requested to download this lecture and listen to it and take notes in your handout, as handout does not contain all the examples and all the information discussed in this video lecture. So thank you very much once again.